Hi everybody, my name is Larsen. In this video I'm going to talk about all the chords you can find in the key of C major. So most people think about the key of C major as being a C major scale and then the diatonic chords that you have there. But there are only 7 different chords, and actually you can relate a lot more chords to the key of C major, and a lot more chords have a well-defined place within that key and within the progressions in C major. So that's what I'm going to try to sort of go over and demonstrate a bit. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the key of C major and then just all the notes of the chromatic scale. And for each note in the chromatic scale, I have 5 different chord types. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about which of them are related to the key of C major and a little bit about how they have a place in C major. What I'm going to do is, so I'm going to take for each note in the chromatic scale, so if we start just with C, I'm going to do 5 different chord types: a major 7, a dominant 7, minor 7, half diminished and diminished. And of course it's not all chord types, and you could talk about more of them, but that's only going to make it longer. And in this way you sort of have the basic chord types covered, and I think you can get a really good picture of the huge amount of chords you have available within a key. The key of C major and then the chromatic scale. Let's just start on C. So the first chord is just a C major. So C major 7 is obviously just the one chord, like this. The next one will be a C7. Now C7 obviously is not in the scale, but it does have a function because it's the kind of chord you will have as an auxiliary dominant to the 4th degree. So if we have a progression like, then the C7 is there to take us to the F major 7. Then we have C minor. And the minor chord, so when we're in a major key we can borrow from minor. That means that we actually have all the chords in the minor key as well. And in this case you will have a C minor chord. If you know songs like How High the Moon or Tune Up or Solar, you'll realize that they have like sort of modulations that start on a C major and then we'll go to C minor, turn that into a 2 chord and then modulate a whole step down. So that's one of the places where you'll find that. You can also find bossa novas that kind of go back and forth. Love for Sale has also this thing about going between major and minor all the time. So that's one, the C half diminished. So this chord, I'm going to talk about that a little bit more detail than with some of the other half diminished chords, because the only place you'll find a C half diminished in the key of C major would be if you have that as a part of a cadence, I think. So that would be a cadence to a B flat in this case. And that means that it's not really a chord that will sort of happen independently. I'm not going to be completely consequent about how I talk about this, but the chords that are only found as 2 chords in a 2/5 within a key, I'm just going to leave out, because otherwise we have all chords in all keys, I think. And it's more important about just having the ones that really have a place as a function, and that you'll also actually find in some songs. I think, I don't know any songs in C major that actually has a C half diminished happening. So that doesn't really have a place in the key of C. The next one is a diminished chord, and that's good that we're on this, because immediately that's going to talk about how this is not so consequent. There are songs that originally are harmonized with a diminished chord on the root. The first one that comes to mind is Stella, I think. We start like this. So the tonic diminished, as Rick Beato calls it, is actually fairly common. In fact, this is I mean, it's not a tonic chord, obviously, because it doesn't sound, in this case, if we're in C, it does not sound like any kind of tonic, but it is in fact a subdominant chord, and this is actually an inversion of a sharp 4 diminished, so which I'll get to when I get a little bit higher in the chromatic scale. And I'm gonna take that in with, like, I'm talking about it now, I'm gonna talk about it again in one of the other inversions, because they're very common there, and that's more sort of for a practical reason that they're in there several times. So those are all the chords for the C. So let's just go a half step up and then go to D flat. So the D flat major 7. So in the key of C, that's actually just the Neapolitan subdominant, which you will find in several places. One of the most frequent uses of this is in a 2/5, where you're sort of ending a song and the melody will go to the root, so, and then you can use this as a sort of suspension. So that's in jazz one of the most common ways to use the Neapolitan subdominant. If you're checking out songs like I Used to Dark Dream, then they're actually using the Neapolitan subdominant as sort of a pivot chord to modulate to some other keys. And you could say the same about All Things You Are. So that's that one. Then we get a D flat 7. So D flat 7 also has a role in C because it's the tritone of the G7. So that's kind of how you will hear it. If you hear this progression, you will hear that that's in C major, and you can hear that this is a tritone of the G7. The next one would be the D flat or C sharp minor. I don't think that really, I don't know of any C major songs how I can sort of say this has a clear defined function, so that's not in there. The same kind of goes for the C sharp, half diminished. You will only kind of come across that as in some sort of 2/5. The D flat, or especially C sharp diminished, is quite common because that's sort of an auxiliary 7th, which is like a diminished chord that's working as a dominant. So you'll see that in progressions where you're, for instance, so it's leading to the 2nd degree, right? So we get, and you have progressions like, I'm trying to think of one that does that. Actually, what's that called? That's called It Could Happen to You, has that. If I play that in C, it's going to be. So that's a fairly common chord to come across in the key of C as well. Then we go to D, and D major. I don't know of any places where you could say that D major really has a place in the key of C. The D7 is the dominant of G7. So actually what's going to happen here is that I'm going to talk about all the dominants because there are a few that are a little bit interesting. They can appear as several different things. But in general, all the dominants will work because they're always going to be the auxiliary dominant or the tritone for something. But in this case, the D7 is the dominant of G7, and it's a very common chord if you're playing standards to have a sort of a few bars of D7 at some point in a song, at the end of a bridge or at the end of a first half of a standard. So for that, that's a chord you should sort of be aware of, I think. D minor 7 is the 2nd degree, so of course that's in the key of C. And then we get D half diminished. And this is of course something that's kind of coming out of C minor. So you will come across that as a possible chord like this at the ending of a song. And also because it's such a common chord to have, on occasion you will find them as just sort of a 4 minor type sound. So you will have. And of course also in the cadence, like, since this is the 2 chord, it's allowed to just appear also in the cadence and get a mention, like what's it called? I Love You from Cole Porter. Then we get the D diminished. So D diminished. Well, D diminished is an inversion of B diminished, and actually D diminished, it might appear once in a while. I'm not going to put it in there because I'm just going to talk about all the inversions of the diminished when we get to that one. so I'm not going to add that in there. Again, I'm not going to be completely consequent about this, but it's a fairly rare chord to come across as a D diminished in C major. And anyway, it's going to be an inversion of a B diminished. So now we're on E flat. Well, the E flat, so E flat major 7 is of course just the flat third, so that's coming out of C minor, and that's definitely something that you can come across. The E flat 7, I think the most common way you're going to see this in the key of C major is going to be as a tritone substitute, resolving to D minor, so that's going to be that type of progression. You can of course also have that it actually goes to the flat 6, because that's also, as you'll see, something that you'll find in C minor, C major. So, like this ladybird turn around. E flat minor 7. I think you'll only find that. You will actually come across that in some songs that are harmonized like that, but usually that's just as part of a 2/5, where it's like A flat 7, G7. So I'm not going to put that in there. The same go for the E flat half diminished. That's also not really something that on its own has a place in C major. The E flat diminished is a different story. So because the E flat diminished is another inversion of an F sharp diminished. So it's another sharp 4 diminished inversion, and you probably already know these type of progressions. So that's a place where you have the E flat diminished quite often, and of course you'll see it also work as a diminished resolving to an auxiliary diminished dominant. It's not diminished dominant; it's like an auxiliary 7th degree to the 3rd degree. But I think the most common one is the sharp 4 down to D minor, and then we get E. So E major 7. It's one of the most common places to modulate to when you're in the key of C. If you're sort of playing standards anyway, but actually the chord itself doesn't really appear in C, so in that way it's not really in there. Then you get the E7. Again, this is a dominant that is an auxiliary dominant to A minor. I think it's the best place to sort of put that. And besides being that, there's another place where you have it. It's used to resolve to F major, so it kind of still works as a dominant, but it resolves to the flat 6 of A minor, and that's an F major 7. And when you'll come across that in a few standards, like this type of sound, and it's also in Creep by Radiohead. That's a dominant that has two different functions. Then we get the minor 7, that's of course just the 3rd degree. E half diminished. Well, so that's only going to happen. That actually happens in C7, in C major, but it's only happening in sort of places where you have it as a cadence really. So it's only together with an A7. So in itself, it doesn't really have a place in C. We get E diminished. And I guess I'm not sure if there are any sort of that I know any standards just off by heart that has a diminished cadence to the 4th degree. Certainly that's sort of a valid type of progression, I think. So let's just put that in there as well. And then we go to the 4th degree. So F major 7 is of course just the diatonic 4th degree, so obviously that's in the key. The F7, I guess, mostly when you come across F7 in the key of C major, then that's actually as a tritone dominant resolving to E minor. So this type of progression. So basically C major, F7 to E minor. Another place where you might come across it also is that sometimes the 4th degree is just played as a dominant. I guess it's just sort of a blues thing. Like it's not really something you can describe as anything, but just trying to pull out a kind of blues sound. Well, actually, Love for Sale has it in the original, and so does Tenderly, if you want to check out standards that has this type of progression. And then we move to F minor. So F minor is the 4th degree in C minor, and that's of course quite well defined in the key of C major as well. So and also, like I just on E7, on the E7 we had this progression from creep. That works as well. So those progressions are quite common. Okay, and then we get F half diminished. That doesn't actually have much of a place in C major. And then we do the diminished. So F diminished is again just an inversion of the B diminished, so we'll get to that later. So F sharp major 7 doesn't really have much of a place. I can't think of a song that in C major you have sort of the sharp 4 or flat 5 as a major 7 chord. The F sharp 7, you do kind of you have that once in a while. You'll get as a tritone substitute to go to the 4th degree. Then we get the F sharp minor 7. That's not that a chord that I would say really appears in C major. The F sharp half diminished. So that one is actually fairly common, because we have, if you take a song like Night and Day with, then that will have sort of a descending line from F sharp to F minor, and in other places it's a sort of a reharmonization, but it's quite common also to have, actually this is sort of an ending, and you can come across this type of reharmonization of a song, especially if it starts on the root. So the F sharp diminished is probably one of the chords that is giving a lot of improvisers the most problems, because it's like the diminished chords that we have it in inversion, so we have it here and we have it on the E flat and on the C as well. Basically it's the same chord, and it doesn't resolve really like a dominant, so that makes it difficult to really play the way that we're used to hearing a diminished chord as a dominant. I think that's usually the problem, because it's a subdominant chord. And I think the way you want to hear this, if you want to hear it in a progression where it makes sense, that would be something like C and then C7, F sharp diminished, and then back to C. And that's how I know it from. I always have the idea that it sounds kind of like gospel, or maybe like in like calypso music. You have it quite often as well. So that's the connection I have with it. And if you think of it like that, then you can hear how it isn't really, in that case, like a dominant, that it is a different kind of diminished chord. So G major 7 doesn't really have a real place in the key of C major. It's a common place to modulate to, or at least to modulate towards without actually going there. But that's also why we have the dominant of the dominant as often as we do in standards. But there are not that many songs that actually go there. You could play Stella by Starlight, so it actually modulates to F. You can also play a song like My Foolish Heart, and then that will also go to the key of the dominant. And then we get, of course, G7 is well defined, because that's just the dominant. I don't really need to talk about that. G minor 7. You can come across, there are a few songs that actually has that in it. So the way I know, what's it called? Old Dale Moon has that. And of course, the minor dominant is also something that you have in some sort of more folk inspired pieces, or actual folk songs, even though that's more in a minor key that you have it. But it happens, and it is something that will happen. Usually when you come across the G minor in the key of C though, so the dominant as minor chord is going to be as part of a cadence to the 4th degree. And there it's extremely common. And then G half diminished, it's not really found any places, and G diminished, also not really. Okay, so we go to A flat major 7. A flat major 7 is the flat 6 in C minor. So that's a very common. So that's actually a very common chord to come across. Also, like now I'm playing it as being part of the cadence in Night and Day. The A flat 7 is actually very common in C minor because it's sort of the minor version of the dominant. And the way we would see it here is probably just as a tritone substitute for C7, for D7 going to G7, is what I mean to say. And that's where you're going to come across it mostly. There is also this other, all these other types of chords. I'm not really going to go into that too much. The way I learned them is that they're called double diminished. This type of progression. And then we get A flat minor 7. That's not really something that has a real place in C major. The same, of course, for the half diminished. And the diminished is again just inversion of B diminished, so I'm also going to leave that behind. So A major 7 doesn't really have a place in C major. I think as soon as we start moving, we get the A major 7, then usually that's just that we actually modulate it, where what happens is usually that we're going to be pointing to A minor and then actually go to A major, and then it's going to sound like a new tonic, in fact. The A7 is of course just the dominant for D minor, so that's an auxiliary dominant. It's a very common dominant to come across in C. A minor 7 is diatonic chord, so it's just a 6 degree. A half diminished. Of course, this is a chord that's diatonic to C melodic minor, but I don't think I've ever seen it really used in C major like that. And if you're in C minor, you might come across it as being like a 6 chord, like this type of progression. But in C major, you don't really have it appearing except as a part of a 2/5. And then we have A diminished. So A diminished is the inversion of the F sharp diminished that doesn't really get used that much, or at all. I don't think I know any songs that actually has this diminished in it in C. So or in any key, but then so that doesn't really have a place in there. B flat major 7. So you will come across, especially I think in bossa novas, you'll have places where you have like this movement from C to B flat in the melody. Right now I'm thinking of the verse of Gingy. So in that way, that is a chord that you can come across, and I guess it's used sort of in the same way as you would use, like in major, you're going to use the 5 minor chord, and so that is certainly a chord that you come across. B flat 7 is a little bit more interesting because, of course, B flat 7 you can come across it as being like a tritone dominant to A minor, but what we mostly hear with this one is probably that it's used as a 4 minor chord. So that means that if you have a 4th degree and then you want to go back to the 1, you make it a 4 minor, but you make it into a B flat 7, because a B flat 7 is of course an F minor 6 with a B flat on the bass, and then resolve that, so you get this kind of progression. And that's fairly common. You'll see that in quite a few songs. And then we get B flat minor 7. So B flat minor 7 doesn't really have any real place in C, except as part of the cadence. And the same would go for the B flat half diminished. And I mean, in theory, you could argue that you could have an auxiliary 7th to the 7th degree, so you would have sort of an A sharp diminished to B half diminished, but I think that's kind of, it's not very likely to happen. Not that it isn't possible, of course. And then we have the last note, so that's the B. So B major 7, which doesn't really appear except when you're modulating, so that's not in the key. B7. So B7 is actually fairly common. This type of progression. Mostly when you see it, it's actually used sort of as a chain of tritone substitution, so you're gonna come across stuff like this. Then we get B minor 7, which doesn't really happen in C major, I think. Then we have B half diminished, which is the 7th degree, so you will actually see that once in a while. And of course it's diatonic, it has a well-defined place. And then finally the B diminished, which I talked about with all the inversions of it. And in the key of C major, this is the 7th degree borrowed from harmonic minor. So, and that you will come across once in a while. As you can tell, there are really a lot of chords. Actually, most chords are in the key of C, or have a well-defined place within progressions in the key of C. And I think that's in itself an interesting conclusion to this. So the way you're going to use all this information is probably just as an overview and maybe some inspiration, and to get some ideas of where you can go look for chords and how you can use them a little bit. I try to give examples for all the chords a little bit, how they're going to sit in progressions, but I can't go into too much detail because then this video will be like 5 hours long. But I think what you can also tell from this is just that with the key of C major, there are so much material already there, and it goes so much beyond just having 7 diatonic chords. You can really go much further if you're looking for harmony that's still related to the key, and we're still staying completely tonal, and everything is kind of easy to explain. So that's probably the way you want to look at it, and maybe you can sort of explore some of the songs I'm talking about, or I mean, you can always ask in the comments if there's something that's unclear, or if you want to hear more examples of something. And for the rest, I think this is what you use as a blueprint for just, this is raw information for writing your own chord progressions and your own tunes and arranging songs and coming up with intros that are just a little bit more interesting and surprising. If you want to learn more and explore more stuff on jazz guitar, harmony, soloing, different arpeggios and stuff like that, then subscribe to my channel. I publish a new lesson every week, and I've been doing this for almost 3 years now, so there's already a lot of stuff on my channel to check out. And there's always more coming, so if you subscribe, you'll stay up to date. If you have any questions, then just leave a comment on this video or connect with me on social media. There's a bunch of links in the description, you can check that out. That's about it for this one. Thank you for watching, and until next week.